Welcome to the Planning and Zoning meeting for October 1st, 2018. Item number one on the is consent agenda, and it's approval of the agenda for October 1st. Do I hear any motions?
Mr. Chair, I move that we accept the consent agenda.
Second.
All right, it's moved and seconded. We'll go with that. And then we have to approve the minutes from June 4th. And the same thing applies. I need a...
Mr.
Yeah.
I'll second.
All right, it's moved and seconded as well. We'll move on to item 2, the application for SE 18102.
Okay.
Staff.
Evening, Planning Commissioners. Sorry about the technical difficulties. They've changed the projector and how that all works on me, and the city's being nice enough to try to figure it out, but we'll just move on without it if we can.
Yeah, it's a acting city manager, too.
I know. It's very helpful.
It's a bonus.
So I'll just, instead of our usual PowerPoint, I will just go down our staff report for the most part and see if we can get this done. The application is for a transfer of development rights. For a transfer of development rights, the Planning Commission needs to make a finding for the sending property that it is located in the floodplain. It's 80 acres or larger. It would retain agricultural zoning if it's dropped to 0 rights. It would put a deed restriction on that property if it's down to 0 rights, and it's been the same owner for 10 years. On the receiving property, you have to make the findings that it is not within the urban service area or within 1 mile of the city. It has available infrastructure. If it has more than one development right being transferred, it would need platting, which is not happening in this case. It's not on Class 1 or 2 farm soil. It's not in the floodplain, and there are no existing deed restrictions. The sending property is located in Section 27, Township 13, Range 2. That is basically the southwest corner of Campbell and Woodward. The receiving property is located in Section 29, Township 14, Range 2, and that is Markley Road just north of Magnolia. Here's where I would love to have a picture for you, but I don't. The sending property is roughly a quarter section. It is 144 acres. The best way to explain this, there's pivot irrigation that runs the entire quarter section there. The corners that are not irrigated on the north side are developed, and they are separate properties that are not involved in this. The floodplain covers, I'm going to say about 40% of the property, maybe a little bit more. When I look at sending properties, I normally like to see a little more floodplain, but in this case, when you're doing pivot irrigation, the part that wants to develop are those unirrigated parts, the corners. The two that are out of the floodplain are already developed and separated out. The two that are still in the floodplain could potentially be developed, and that's what we're saving if we use this as the sending property. Because there is only one development right left, it would drop to 0. So one of the conditions we're going to add is that the sending property provides a deed restriction to agricultural use only, no housing. The receiving property is, like I said, just north of Magnolia Road on Markley. City limits are just to the east of it with, I believe it's the Magnolia Hills subdivision. To the south, there is additional development. And let me get my notes for everything here. Okay. For all your findings, the sending property, a good portion or enough is in the floodplain. It is over 80 acres. It is agriculturally zoned, and the property owner is willing to put a deed restriction on there and keep it as agricultural zoning. And it does have the same owner for the last 10 years or more. The receiving property, let me get to my notes on that one. It does have available infrastructure. Markley Road is paved. There is rural water down that line. And with us, anybody would do a septic system or lagoon, whatever the soils say there. No platting is required. The farm soil is Class 3, so it's not prime farm ground. It's not in the floodplain, and there are no existing deed restrictions. The problem that I have on this, and reason I'm recommending denial for this, it is within the urban service area, and it is within 1 mile of the city limits. It's actually across the street from the city limits. For city development in that area, the city is currently, there is a city water main that runs up Markley. The city is also working on a $2 million sewer line project. I believe you all have the letter that the city submitted last minute there. That'll explain a lot of the development potential in that area. Again, this is where I wish I had a map for you. The proposed sewer line will run down Markley, across the north end of this property, down the west end of this property. It kind of follows a draw to avoid that, and then cuts down to Magnolia, and then it connects back into the city main. Creating that sewer there will basically prime all of this for development potential. And I'll stay out of that side because you have the letter from the city that explains a lot more than I can what's going on there. That's all I have for you. Mr. Darrell Holting and his wife Kim are both here if you have any questions for them. And don't forget to open this for public discussion.
That's, okay, at this time, we'll open it for public discussion, and we'll see if anybody has anything to say, and then hopefully anybody has any questions, we can talk to the applicant.
Good evening. My name is Todd Welch, 221 South Morris Drive, and I just come to you. I was going to talk after Darrell, but public opening before applicant that threw me for a loop there. So I just wanted to let you know, I received a phone call from Darrell on this particular property just to get my thoughts on what he could do with that. I think he had went down and was told by the county that he couldn't get a building permit for this particular property. And then I'll let Darrell talk to you on how he purchased it and when he talked to me about it. The reason he talked to me is I am a developer within the city limits. Just came out of a planning commission or a city commission meeting right before that of getting a 17-lot subdivision done. So when Darrell talked to me, we looked at this piece of property and said, hey, the city is kind of protesting it's within the 1 mile district. As a developer, what do you think of this property? And so as I looked at it, I was like going, okay, well, I don't know that I could do anything with it because it's 4.5 acres. The way you would, I don't know that with the infrastructure, even with the sewer line that the city's been working on forever to bring down from Valley View and connect down to Magnolia Road, that's been in the works for quite a while, and it sounds like maybe they've got that finally coming through. But I guess I would let you know that when I looked at it, I'm not quite sure that how you would, like this is that desirable if somebody's trying to piece this together as a developer, because even if, I can't remember the gentleman who owns the property to the Larson, I believe Harold Larson owns the property.
I think so.
Yeah, and I've talked to him many times, and he hasn't really wanted to develop that, but if he does, he wants a ton of money for it. And then I've also talked to the family who owns
Mr.
the
Welch,
large.
Excuse me.
Yep.
You were talking about a property owner, but there's property owner to the south and property owner to the north, right?
There's a property owner to the north who's Larson, who I was speaking of.
Okay.
Yeah, and then the family, the gentleman who then owns the large chunk of land, which would be to the west of that, which then kind of goes up against the river that's there. That's all. There's maybe one homestead that's back in there as well. And I've actually sat down and had a meeting with him about developing that. It's actually the son of the people who own that. I can't recall his name now, but he came to my office and we talked about how to develop that piece of property as well, and then they decided not to do anything at the time. And one of the reasons not to do any time is because of the way that land lays in there. When we looked at having an engineer look at that, we couldn't, I mean, it was kind of be difficult to put in roads, and then the lower level, which David may talk to that a little bit, kind of lows in, there's a flood area right there in that lower section of that ground that's there. I guess what I'm getting the point at is it does fit within the 1 mile radius of the city limits, but when Darrell explained to me when he bought it that they split it off as two homes. They were going to build two homes there at one time, and they split it immediately when they purchased it. And then the property just to the south of that which would be at the corner of Magnolia and Markley Road, where we all know the fireworks stand goes from time to time. The other gentleman has built a beautiful home behind that tree row, and I'm not quite sure what the plans will ever be for the front of that. I'm not sure, and David May can speak to that, if that is still in the floodplain or whether that's a buildable lot, I don't know.
As far as the lots in the area, basically the south half of that quarter section, basically that 80 acres, there are 3 lots that make up kind of the east portion of it along Markley. There is, don't quote me on the numbers here, but there's roughly 10 acres, the fireworks stand lot. That is a house. There's no floodplain in that area. The floodplain follows the creek just west of everything. 10 acres for the, I'm just going to call it the fireworks house because I'm sorry I don't know the owner's name off the top of my head. There's the 4-acre, 5-acre roughly house, which is Mr. Holting's house, and then there's the lot that they would like to develop north of that.
Excuse me. I thought there was a house north of that lot you were talking about. There's that.
As I go from the intersection, and I apologize for not having maps, but as I go from the intersection of Markley and Magnolia, there's first a 10-acre lot, but we're calling it the fireworks house.
Across the windbreak or the draw is one house.
Yep, that's
To the
one.
north of that is a house.
Yes, that would be
That's
Mr.
the
Holting's
Holting's house.
house.
That'd be the applicant's home.
To
And,
the north of that is the lot we're talking about.
correct.
Correct.
And then north of that is that heavily forested area. There are some homes back there, but they're not affected by any of this.
Understood.
The people that own that lot on the corner is Tom and Diane O'Neill,
O'Neill.
No,
Correct.
thank you.
Correct.
just to let you know who that is.
Yeah, and they built a single, and the reason I know that, as a real estate agent as well, I followed that. There was a group called Bugle Builders who owned that at one time. Lonnie Wilson actually owned it at one time, sold it to Bugle Builders. Bugle Builders tried to zone that to bring it in and do some housing in there, but there was no sewer available at the time that was there. The water loop was costly, and maybe the floodplain has been changed since then, but at one time I heard there was a flood issue in there, but maybe with the new flood maps that got resolved. I guess what I'm saying is, not to take up your time and let Darrell speak, is I get what the city's wanting to do, but unless he can piece and pie that all together for future development, which Larson doesn't need his 4 acres to develop his, what are we calling that, 30 acres maybe right there?
Yeah, about 30
About
acres.
30 that he has. We wouldn't need any need for that. The other acreage that is owned by the family that I met with, who has the one back there, that's a large enough piece that they're not going to need to attract this acreage that here. I feel like after visiting with Darrell on there, it's kind of the motions have been set throughout the years, many years ago, as these 3 lots were meant to be built on. At some point, somebody allowed him to do a lot split. The DSNO has agreed to have it inside their area still. It's still, is it a county road, or is the city actually taking that road in? It's not to city standards, I know that.
City has annexed that.
The city has annexed it?
Yes,
Even though it's not to city standards, I think they've still annexed it.
they went in and annexed that.
Okay, so there's no curb, gutter, street, and all that stuff
No,
in
at
there,
this
so that
point,
hasn't been
no.
done. Yeah. So anyway, that was sort of just my 2 cents on there. I just came to him because there's a little bit of a hardship where I went, man, I can't believe that this was what it was intended for, and you're not having a building permit. So I'm coming to you as a developer saying, I wouldn't have any interest for that, and nor talking to Harold Larson and what his plans are, and the other person, I just had way too much knowledge to know that this is probably the highest and best use would be for a single-family home to be built on that particular location, given that was the intent from the very beginning. Be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's talk to
Yeah,
Darrell.
Mr. Holting.
Good evening. I'm Darrell Holting, 2288 Markley Road. I'm not a real estate guy. I've never been to a zoning meeting. I don't know much about what's going on. I do know that approximately 25 years ago, we bought that from Herb and Gene Monroe. I don't know if you remember them. He was a surveyor. And we talked, and he seemed like a pretty knowledgeable guy. And he said, would you ever want to build? And I said, we may want to. In fact, he said, he said, now's the time to divide it if that's what you're thinking about doing. The issue was the price of the land. We didn't have a lot of money then, so my wife's folks bought it initially when we split it and owned it for probably until a couple years ago. And it's pretty clear that they're not going to move here from South Dakota, and probably be better off for everybody involved if they didn't. So we have a 5-bedroom house. We had somebody approach us and said, we love that house. We love your location. We'd love to, we have 4 kids, be a great fit for us, and come look at it, said we'd be interested in buying it. And all of our kids are out of the house and gone and don't come back much. We said, you know what, maybe it's time for us to downsize a little bit. And so we went out and looked around. My wife's still looking, and all of us said, well, how about the 5 acres north of us? Our concern at the time, and I think this might be a little bit of what Todd was talking about, we picked the highest location of the 10 acres to build our house on, and if you notice, there is a huge hill to the north. And when it rains, water runs down that hill, and it enters in the middle of the property, and it runs down the ditch, and then runs through the property, and it's a pretty low swag through there. And I was concerned about, okay, if we build a house, would we be able to find a place that's high enough that, you know, we're not going to have water running through our front yard or things like that. And again, I don't know anything about I'm not a real estate guy. I'm not trying to development. I'm not trying to build it to make money or anything like that. But one of the reasons I wanted Todd Ellis to say, look at that. Do you think a house, you could actually put a house over there? And then I got caught up in all the hoopla of a building right and all that other stuff, which I didn't know anything about. And so we all looked at it. I had a number of people look at it and go, well, you know, you could probably build a house in one spot. And we kind of took that and run. Daryl Griffin came out, looked. We talked about rural water, and he and Norma are really good friends of ours, and said, you know what, water meters are hard to get in the country. Your water meter, the water runs right by your property. I would suggest probably getting in line or getting your name in the hat or whatever. So we did that. Of course, 3 months later, they called and said, hey, we're ready to put in your water meter. And I said, okay. You know, that's before I knew anything else. So Daryl Griffin came out, put in a water meter, and DS&O, a good friend of mine, works there, and said, hey, DS&O services that. It's not going to be a problem. At one time, somebody suggested, well, maybe you want to look into annexing it in the city. Well, then, I guess to buy out DS&O's rights and the rural water rights and all that said, no, that's not even going to be an option. So we're just asking, we talked to all of our neighbors. I didn't know who Dave all sent letters to. It sounded like half of our neighbors came and said, hey, I hear, and you know, they're going, well, why can't you build a house on your own property? And I said, well, I don't know that for sure, but I'm finding out slowly but surely. And I want to live by the law. I want to be right. When we bought that 25 years ago, we were, the city of Salina was a mile to the west of us. It was probably only about a half a mile north. And we didn't vote on, you know, our neighbors developing across the street. And I'm not saying that, you know, to be mean-hearted to him or whatever. I get that. We'd be perfectly okay if we were right back where we were 25 years ago, where you couldn't see a house in any direction but our neighbor on the hill. But that's not the case. So, like I said, I don't want people to think that we're trying to do something illegal or something we can't do. They said we had to get a building permit, building right, and I did that. And the guy, several people I talked to said, hey, that's great, because that land isn't good for farming, one of them said. And I said, well, I can verify that. We get, I think, 2 bales of brome off of it each year. That's after we fertilize it. So I don't want to open a corporate hog farm or something out there because it's zone agriculture. But that's kind of where we came from, and that's where we got. And when we came in to talk about building on it, the guy said, you can't build on it. I was stunned. And I said, we already got a rural water meter and so on and so forth. But natural gas runs by there. And we knew 12 years ago, I think I did go to a meeting, and they talked about running a sewer line, and it's going to be on the opposite side north of us. And you know, we want to do whatever's right and whatever's best. We don't have any preconceived notion. Like I said, I'm a farm boy from eastern Kansas, and I don't know all the political hoopla that goes with this, but we want to do it right, and we ask for permission or your consideration or whatever to allow that to happen. 'Cause I have to agree with Todd. I don't think you could develop that just because it's in such a low place. The valley or low swag runs right through the middle of it. So, hope I didn't bore you. I know the Chiefs and Broncos are on, but that was my take on it.
That's all right, I'm a Raiders fan, so that's fine with me.
They won yesterday, so you should be in a good mood.
Anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay.
David, is this a plotted?
Speak into the mic and make them happy.
What a big,
Yeah.
great,
Yeah,
great idea.
please.
Is this a plotted lot?
What had happened back in, if I can't remember the exact dates, but when Mr. Monroe had separated the land, it was originally 20 acres and an original parcel, which gave it 2 development rights. This all kind of almost happened simultaneous, but the 10-acre lot and the 4.5-acre lot for Darrell here were split off. That created the 2 development rights. At the same time, this third piece was created. It was the last piece created, but there are no development rights for that. So the county had sent a letter out to Mr. Monroe informing him that this is not a buildable lot. Either join it back in or somehow plat it. At that time, we didn't have a transfer of development rights rule. Today, we do have a transfer of development rights rule, and that would correct the unbuildable lot status, except that the rule says don't transfer development rights within a mile of the city.
And that's a development right we got from Lonnie Hagel?
That's what we're working on right now.
Not yet.
Oh, if that,
Yeah.
yeah,
If
okay.
they approve it, you get the development right. If
Okay,
they
right.
don't approve it,
But this was never a platted lot.
no, it was never correctly surveyed out.
Okay.
I guess I'm confused. So is this section, has it been brought into the city yet, or is it
No.
still?
It is not
It's still
annexed.
in the county?
Yeah, it's still in the
That
county.
But it's
USA
just
zone?
right, it's just right next door to
It's
the
right
city?
next door.
It's what they call the urban service area, USA.
Yeah.
Is that an actual code that we have, David, county, and the county codes and or the comp plan? As
Yes,
far
it
as
is.
the stipulation?
It's in our subdivision code. I can give you the exact number if I can find it here.
That's
but-
okay, I'm looking at the, under applicable codes,
Right. It's,
qualified recipient properties, and that's one of the things it says there.
and that is right from our code book.
Right, okay, thank you.
So what it comes down to is if you would like to approve this, you need to find a good reason, some good finding that would say that, yes, this is something that we should develop. It's somehow outside of what our normal subdivision code would handle.
And along those same lines, do you know what the city's comp plan has to say about this at all? I know it's-
The city expects low-density residential in that area, similar development to what's across the street, both on that Magnolia Hills. I think that's the one across the street from you.
Right, that's Magnolia Hills.
So basically quarter-acre lots, something in that line.
Okay.
On sewer, on water, city
It would be on
sewer.
city water, city sewer.
And my question to you is, because at one time, I think maybe it was you or somebody who talked to the city about developing into the city, and I go, well, I'm not interested in that, and they said, well, there's already DS&O and rural water and all that, and so that wouldn't be feasible.
We had talked about annexation as an option, trying to find other methods to make this as easy as possible. When the city annexes property, they have to basically buy out the franchise rights from DS&O and switch it over to Westar. Same with rural water, they have to switch it over to their city water. that's where you start looking at the bigger picture of development. The more lots you can develop, the more affordable it is to annex and develop the land.
And then you get into jurisdictional, I guess, confusion. Is that Rural Fire District 5, or is that?
Once it's annexed in, it
Yeah,
will be.
once it's annexed, then it's the city, but I know there's been issues on Marymount Road before where Rural Fire was paged out, it should have been city.
Let me find current jurisdiction for you. I want to say 5.
I'm pretty sure it's 5.
What would end
But the
up
bottom line
happening-
is, whether it's 5 or whatever, I mean, that would be the other issue as far as who's going to fight that fire.
What normally ends up happening when an emergency is called, the city will arrive first because they are the closest. They will work on life safety first. They're going to make sure the people are out of the house.
Right.
Then they will, as long as there's no life safety to the firemen, work on the fire. They will make sure the fire doesn't spread to other houses, but I'm not going to guarantee that the house doesn't go down in flames. It's just how city and rural fire works together. Once rural fire gets there, they'll do
Right.
more. The other warning I should provide is, as everything develops out there, county environmental regulation will call for any property within 400 feet of a sewer line to hook up to that sewer. What I would foresee happening, and this is more of a warning than anything else, the house would develop, we would develop it with a septic system because there is no sewer line there at this time. Eventually that sewer line will be built. Probably 20 to 30 years from now is when that septic system will begin failing. When that happens, it would be required to hook up to the city sewer line. The city would charge their service rates, which their service rates are set for small lot urban housing. They are not set for rural housing. They basically charge per square foot of lot. It would be a large fee. I have no idea, somewhere in the 30 to 40,000 range, but it would end up large. Sorry, try to provide fair warning to everything that's going on when I discover it.
So the issue at hand here is this is an unplatted lot, and we have an 80 acre in the floodplain that has an available house site
Correct,
that we can move over to that.
correct,
And then we have the city who is not agreeable to this whatsoever.
correct. It's,
As well as our code, county code.
Correct.
what you're looking for is an overriding reason that we should transfer a development right to a property within the city area, within that 1 mile of the city.
I wish you would have a picture so you could kind of get a lay of the land, but I said it's,
Yeah,
It should
Oh,
be
you
in your
got one.
staff reports.
we've got it.
I like it better up on the screen, but.
Right.
well, I don't know about on a screen, but I'm just, I said I would be stunned if they could develop that, and maybe they can.
We
Yeah,
can do
that's
a
it.
lot of dirt moving these days.
Because I think I read the city said it should be into about 3 lots.
Yeah, 3 lots. And that was another question, that's that 4.5 acre lot that he's suggesting would be split into thirds, right?
Yes, 4.59 to be exact.
That's what I read on the back page there.
Back page, Mark. It's the original parcel number.
Yeah. Property should be platted into 3 building lots in order
The
to
city is
obtain a
recommending
building
platting over transferring of a development right, which is a process that this could all go through. To do the platting, we would have to rezone all 3 properties to an RA, which is residential agricultural zoning, and then submit a plat along with that. The platting would lay out all 3 lots and access. The plating at the same time, because it's within a mile of the city limits, the county has an agreement with the city that all plating would be joint authority, so both the county and the city would have to approve that plat.
But that way it is platted.
It would be platted, and that would meet all codes, provided that zoning and plating is done. And I can't guarantee any approvals on that either.
Had to make it tough.
Sorry.
It's all right.
If he were to go and ask to annex that into the city, once it's annexed, doesn't the city then have to require all of the utilities for annexation?
I believe so. I don't know the speed at which the city has to supply
That's my
those.
understanding. So what's interesting is now he's at a catch-22 in there. If he were to go to the city and ask to be annexed into the city, so the city doesn't want him to do this, but I guarantee you the city doesn't want to annex it either. Because once they annex it, they have to provide the city sewer, the city water, the fire, and buy out all of those rights from DSNO. And that's where it gets convoluted as well, is they don't want to buy it. They don't, it's an unfortunate deal where it happened that's there, and I'm surprised that it wasn't. So when that was bought with the 10 acres, when Herb Monroe, so there's not a lot and block specifically for this other 5-acre piece?
No, they were just, with the county, we dedicate development rights. There's a calculation of 80 acres for every development right plus 1 if it's an original parcel. An original parcel is any parcel of land that has not been modified since 1976. This land was under 80 acres, so that gives you 1, because we're going to at least give you 1. But it was also an original parcel, so that makes it 2. For the entire, let's call it a 20 acre for the sake of math. The 10-acre piece was split off and uses 1 development right. Then you have the north half of the 10 acres, which is Mr. Holting's property. That uses a development right. But that was split into 4.5 technically, lots.
Right.
We don't have a third development right. To do that, it's just a simple survey.
Sure.
No plating required.
So this commission has the authority to grant that building right by taking it from Lonnie Heigl and transferring it over there, even though it's not part of the comp plan of what is written in there. Or the city is saying the best interest for the long term of this property, we all want to be here for the next 20 years, or at least I'm going to be here. They're saying that the best interest is for this to be annexed into the city at some point, 3 individual homes be put on there, and a street be put in.
The way the city is looking at it, and we're looking at options that would
Sure.
do this. If we look at the transfer of development rights, which is what we're looking at today, what the Planning Commission should find is that there is an overriding reason to transfer development right adjacent to the city. The other option that the city has recommended, which was originally recommended when this lot split off, because we didn't have transfer of development rights at that time, was to plat that, which would make 3 distinct lots. It does not have to be annexed to do that. If it is annexed, it would go over to the city to handle through their processes. And that could be through platting. It can be through a number of ways they can do that. The platting would create the 3 lots, the 10-acre and the 2 4.5-acre lots. There would probably be some request for roadway. I'm not sure how that would work out, because generally we don't like to see individual driveway entrances along major roads.
But they could use the same culvert that they're, since they own the property now, they could access into a Y
That's
by
possible.
utilizing that
Yeah.
same one. Yeah.
We would probably ask, as far as the county standards go, we would ask for a turnaround of some kind. which would be either a hammerhead or a cul-de-sac, and then split between the two properties.
If this current commission were to grant that building right, you're educating me now, so could the city overturn that, or does that?
The city could appeal it. Any aggrieved party can appeal a decision made by the planning commission, which would then go to the Board of County Commissioners.
I'm just trying to figure out what the highest and best use for that is. Again, as a developer within the city rights, if that ever got annexed in, the only way that all makes sense is if whoever buys Larson's ground picks up the 5 acres, or whoever develops that back end picks up the other acreage that's there, yet those parcels are so big, they don't really need his 4 acres to do anything with it. And it does fall within the county guidelines of 3-acre minimums. I mean, we're dealing with the 4.5, I think that's there. I mean, again, I'm just speaking of, I live in the county as well.
Yeah.
I'm looking at what's the highest and best use of this piece of ground. Given the conundrum that it's in, is it better for us to grant this right and build a nice home that fits next to there, or do we wait and hope that the people who buy, whether it be 10 or 15 years down the road, when they annex that all in and buy all that outright, does the developer like me then buy his, I don't think he would ever sell me his 4 acres, because why would you want more density homes next to you when there was the reason that was built anyway? So I'm thinking out loud, sorry, don't know whether I'm helping or hurting, but I'm just trying to figure out what's the highest and best use for the 4 acres.
That's kind of the conundrum we're in, is we can develop it as it is, what we're talking about today. You can try to develop 5 acres, I'm calling it 5 acres, I'm rounding up, develop it as it is, and as a developer, you know, the more land you have, the easier and more profitable it becomes.
Yeah, it's very important. I don't even think you could make 5 acres or 4.5 work with 3 lots and put the road in, plus the water and sewer special assessments. They would be $60,000
at 5 acres, you would have to put in a road, you would have to put in proper drainage.
Who owns the corridor to the north of this lot?
I believe it goes. That's a great question, because that's what I looked at as well. And it does access to the, again, I forget their names in the back,
true,
I apologize. But it is that one that lays on the creek bed to the west of that. What's her name? Klein. It is Klein, yeah. Which is interesting to me when I looked at it as a developer. It's not like they're shutting that off, because if they did need a secondary access, they own that easement right there, that if that ever did get accessed in there and this home right got put in there, there is access off of Markley Road.
You've got a road there with building lots.
Yeah, you could do a Markley Road and then over to go back to there if they needed a secondary fire exit, which becomes pretty important in the city at the time. So, anyway, thank you.
Now's the time for the wise one up here to come up with a solution.
Yeah, we all look at each other. We'll close comment from the public, and we'll take it to the board and see what anybody has to say.
Mr. Chairman, going to have a hard, this is a tough one. I know what they want to do and fully understand it. The thing is that the codes say one thing, and we're going to have to somehow justify that in our findings when we make a motion to approve. And at this point, I'm sitting here thinking, how am I going to do that? I don't know about the rest of you gentlemen, but I mean, that's hard, and we were sworn in to uphold the laws, and this code is law, and county code. And I mean, like I said, I fully understand what Mr. and Mrs. Holding are trying to do, and it is a conundrum because it is in the USA of the city. So I don't know what I said there, but my point is that I'm just going to have a hard time coming up with findings to say yes, let's do it.
Find that overriding cause to go against the rules.
Right.
Yes, I believe that's what Mr. Neals indicated, that we'd have to come up with a cause to override that.
And to me, the overriding one would be, it's the man's property. He ought to be able to do with it what he wants, as long as it's not illegal or anything else. But then again, is that enough of an overriding reason to do it? So
if we do deny it, they have an opportunity to go to the county commission and appeal it, as Mr. Neal has said, so. Or,
Typically with the appeals, they would have to have a reason
right.
to appeal it.
They could appeal it either way, probably.
It could be appealed.
If we move to deny the application, then they can take it to the county commission to make their determination. And they can deliberate and decide, well, yes, we're going to uphold it, or no, and here are the conditions. Not trying to take over your job, David, but
Doesn't matter, won't be here. The difficult part with appeals is that, one, it takes a supermajority of the county commission to overturn a planning commission action. So it would take 4 out of the 5 members to vote for that. And with this county commission, they generally support the planning commission. You'd also have to have, I mean, if the planning commission is saying no, let's say because of the code, you'd have to say, well, that decision's wrong based on something. They would need something, that overriding reason, which is what you need.
Which we don't have.
Well, I mean,
If this had been platted back when it was split, and it went before the board and accepted as a plat, as an actual lot, we wouldn't be dealing with this.
Correct.
Yeah, but now it's just a 10-acre field that somebody owns that has a house on it. Even if it's in the county, outside of the city 1 mile, we would still be saying,
Well-
you only got 2 building lots.
Well, if it was outside the USA zone, then it'd be simple.
we wouldn't have an issue because we'd be trying to make that lot usable for something. It's not good farm ground. It's really only really good for housing.
But we have our
Agreement.
code that
That's
says,
the problem. Our agreement with the city is what's going to cause us the biggest grief.
How about a go-kart track?
You're in the county.
Then we could have other people in here wanting us to build a house instead of having that out there. I get all this, and our issue is that we were.
Mr. Holding, you want to come to the mic, please?
Yeah.
It's being televised, so.
That's scary. When we bought it, we were told to divide it for building reasons or anything else in the future, and that I know now that the city has annexed, this, that, and the other thing, and so on and so forth, but that wasn't what it was when we bought it. And when our neighbors got the letter from David saying, no, this could happen or that could happen, and DS&O and rural water and all, I said, well, if you own the land, you're in the country, why couldn't you build? And I said, well, I can't answer that question for you. And they said, well, it just looks like overmanagement to me. And I said, well, I'm sure there's a code or something, but I don't know if that came in effect. If Herb Monroe, maybe I misunderstood what he communicated to me about building. Because if we were going to be on the 5 acres we're at the time, the price was pretty high. We'd have just bought 5 acres and called it good. Because I really didn't need 10 acres, and my father-in-law said, you get one chance to buy the land next to you buy it, and you'll find a use for it or a need or whatever. And in good faith, I said, okay, we'll do that. He did it. He bought it and said, you may want to build or whatever. And I didn't ever get the message that we could not build on it. In fact, when we sent a guy in to get a building permit and they said you couldn't build on it, as I told you before, I was flabbergasted. I said,
Yeah, it's not a platted lot.
The reasons or findings could be that you purchased it prior to this law or agreement going in. Maybe Dave can answer the question of where it's, how long has the agreement between the city and the county been for the one acre or the 1 mile deal? I don't think it's been in that
Well, that's not, that's not the issue here, because the issue is you
Unfortunately-
only had 2 lots that you could build on.
The-
One was your 10 acres and the other one was the other 10 acres. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
Had you
subdivision code
platted
went
it-
into effect 1976, I believe, is one that affects this one.
Okay.
And when that third lot was created, the city and county had both sent letters to Mr. Monroe and family that had purchased the property, saying that this is an issue and the property should be platted.
Right. It should have
Unfortunately,
been platted back then, and it wasn't.
Okay, and what exactly does that mean?
Means it would have been declared as an actual 5-acre lot. 2 5-acre lots that could have been built on.
generally, the county has 2 ways to create lots. One is through a survey. Somebody surveys off the lot, provided that there is enough development rights. The lot is surveyed off, and it's considered a buildable lot. Unfortunately, that didn't happen here. Platting is a little more technical. It allows, it's a lot more technical survey. It creates all the lots in the same manner, but it allows the county to look at the development that will occur because of the platting. Is there a need for extra roadway? Is there a need for internal roadways? How is water handled? How is sewer handled? How is anything that would affect the entire development handled?
And I know somebody wrote in there about having a entrance onto Markley Road, and that, when we bought that land, that was the driveway that's there, was there when we got it, and it's a big driveway. We didn't use it because we built our house over on the higher part of the ground, so, yeah, I said, when we talked to Rural Water and DS&O and everybody we talked to just said, life's good and go for it. And so that's what we did, not knowing anything that we know now. And I said, I know Frank Norton, built a church so they could get city entities, and then it was, okay, now we're in the city and so on and so forth. And, it is what it is, but we just soon, Frank Norton not sold to a church and got it built and then had city, and I thought that if we got a building right, that would be what we needed. Now, as I said, I'm not here, I don't know anything about it, I don't claim to know anything about it. It's just, I think, as I said, I would be stunned if somebody from the city would come up and say, hey, we want to buy that 4.5 acres to develop it. It's just not, the lay of the land is not good, or we'd have built our first house on that acreage.
Yeah, well, it ends up being you've got a 10-acre lot there that you have your house on. That's essentially what it becomes. And it goes into the city, it's a 10-acre lot inside the city. Anywhere else? All right, Chairman.
I'll entertain anybody's thoughts, but all I can do is ask for a motion at this point.
As much as I hate to do it, because I cannot come up with a better suggestion, I do not like doing this. But I make a motion that we follow staff's decision on this property.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, it's been motioned and seconded that we follow staff recommendation and do not approve SE 18-102. All those in favor say aye. Or raise your right hand. Excuse me. All those opposed, raise your right hand. It's 2. Okay, the motion carries at 4 to 2.
No,
No one does.
no.
I will be available after the meeting if you want to stay for a couple minutes and need to ask any questions. If not, I will be at work all day tomorrow. Unfortunately, tomorrow is my last day of work. I will have the action letter from the Planning Commission that will inform you about any of the appeal rights and how that works. And like I said, we can talk about it afterwards. I'll make myself available every way I can for you. With that, we just have to continue with the last part of the meeting.
Yes.
I don't.
Oh, yeah, that's the last part. And this should only take a couple minutes if you want to stay.
It's not really what I wanted.
Okay.
The last part is the additional stuff. There are no meetings for November, and as I just said, this is because I have decided to take a job with the city of Phoenix and move home. I'm sorry I'm going to miss everybody here, but going home is a good thing for me.
I agree.
I'm going to ask the Planning Commission to shut down meetings for November and December. There are no applications in line for November, and I'm just hoping there are none for December. That will give the county a chance to hire a new planning director, and hopefully they can get their feet under them before they start the next meeting.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I may. Dave, it's been great working with you over the years. All the various things we've done together, going out road trips to look at vacating roads, right-of-ways, and all that stuff, and wish you and your family nothing but the best out there in Phoenix, and try to stay cool in the summer.
Yeah, thanks, Don.
It's a good thing to go home.
Appreciate everything you've done for the county.
Yes, very much so.
Thanks.
I want to ditto everything he said.
If you guys want to make a quick motion to vacate for November and December so that we can make that official.
I'll make the motion that we vacate meetings for November and December.
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Next meeting will be in January.
If there's an application, yes.
If there's an application, yes. Okay,
And, yeah,
and hopefully
for
another-
whatever director you have, I'm sure they'll have a different style. Just let them know what you're looking for, and any good planner will adapt to that.
No, that's not
All right,
completely
in
true.
that case,
Danny will keep them on the straight and narrow, right?
Yeah.
all right, meeting adjourned.
Okay.